My husband told me we were bankrupt, that we had lost our beautiful family home. I was devastated. I took our son and moved into my mother's tiny apartment to start our lives over from scratch. Months later, I was watching the local news and I saw him. He was at a high society gala, laughing with his new, younger wife, and the party was being held in my foreclosed house. I have a quick question for you. What city are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And if you love dramatic stories, be sure to subscribe because we post new ones every day. Okay, let's go back to the day my world fell apart. The sound I remember most from that evening was the sound of my husband's heart breaking, or so I thought. He was sitting across from me at our heavy oak kitchen table, the table where we had shared 1,000 meals, where our son, Miles, did his homework. The last rays of the evening sun were streaming through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. And my husband, my strong, confident, capable husband, Trevor, was weeping. He had come home an hour earlier, his face a gray, ashen mask of a grief so profound I thought someone had died. Now he pushed a thick stack of official-looking, intimidating documents across the table towards me. They were full of words I didn't understand: delinquency, default, foreclosure. "I'm so sorry, Meredith," he choked out, his voice a ragged, broken thing. "I tried to protect you from this. I kept thinking I could fix it, that I could turn it around. But it's over. The business, it's gone. Everything. Everything is gone." I stared at the papers, at the bold, red "Notice of Foreclosure" stamped across the top. It felt like a scene from a movie, a nightmare happening to someone else. "What do you mean, gone? We're losing the house?" "We have to be out in a week, Mary," he sobbed, his face crumbling into his hands. "I'm so sorry. I have failed you. I have failed our family." My own shock, my own terror at the thought of losing our home was completely eclipsed by a wave of profound, overwhelming pity and a fierce, protective love for this broken man in front of me. This was my husband, the father of my child, and he was in pain. My first and only instinct was not to blame, but to comfort. I got up, walked around the table, and wrapped my arms around his shaking shoulders. "No," I said, my voice a firm, steady anchor in his storm. "No, you have not failed us." I held his face in my hands. "Listen to me, Trevor. It's just money. It's just a house. It's just stuff. We have each other. We have Miles. That is all that matters. We'll be okay. We will start over. Together." The most difficult part was telling our son. How do you explain to a 7-year-old boy that the only home he has ever known, his bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, his backyard with the tire swing his father had hung for him, was being taken away? We told him a gentle version of the truth, that Daddy's company had run into some trouble, and that we were going to go on a new adventure to live with Grandma Patricia for a little while. The week that followed was a blur of heartbreaking labor. We packed our entire life into a series of brown cardboard boxes. Every object was a memory: the small chip in the coffee mug from our first apartment, the faded photograph from our honeymoon, the clay handprint Miles had made for me in kindergarten. I was not just packing up our belongings, I was packing up our history, sealing it away with tape. Through it all, Trevor was a ghost. He moved through the house with a slow, heavy sadness, his face a mask of tragic sorrow. He was so consumed by his shame, he could barely function. I was the one who was strong. I was the one who managed the movers, who comforted our son, who held it all together. On the last day, as we stood on the curb, surrounded by the last of our boxes, waiting for my mother to arrive in her small old car, he told me his plan. "I can't stay here, Meredith," he said, his eyes fixed on the ground. "The shame, the failure. It's too much. I can't face anyone." He told me he was going to head west, to Texas, to see if he could get a job on a construction crew, to start over, to earn some money. "It won't be for long," he had promised, his eyes full of fake tears. "I will send for you and Miles as soon as I am back on my feet again. I promise." It had sounded so noble, so brave. A man, broken by failure, willing to do the hard, physical labor necessary to rebuild his life for his family. I had hugged him, my heart aching for his pain, for his sacrifice. I watched him drive away in his old pickup truck, the last remaining vehicle that hadn't been seized by the bank. I watched him go, my heart breaking for his shame, for the heavy burden he was now carrying all by himself. I was so proud of his courage, of his determination to start over. I had no idea he wasn't driving towards a construction job in Texas. I had no idea he was driving to the airport to catch a first-class, one-way flight to a new life. A life he had already bought and paid for with every single penny he had just stolen from me and our son. I stood on that cold, empty curb, surrounded by the cardboard-boxed remnants of my life, and I watched as my husband's beat-up pickup truck disappeared around the corner. The sound of its rattling engine faded, leaving a silence so profound, so absolute, that it felt like the end of the world. My son, Miles, clutched my hand, his small face a mask of confused sorrow. "Is Daddy going to be okay?" he whispered. "Yes, sweetie," I lied, my voice a hollow echo of the confident, capable woman I had been just a week ago. "Daddy is very brave. He's just going to find a new job, and then he'll send for us." My mother, Patricia, arrived a few minutes later in her sensible 10-year-old sedan. She didn't offer empty platitudes or pitying glances. She just got out of the car, her face a mask of quiet, resolute strength, and began helping me load our boxes into her trunk. My mother was a woman who understood that sometimes the greatest act of love is not to talk about the storm, but to simply hold the umbrella. Our new home was her tiny second-bedroom apartment. It was a place I had always associated with holiday visits and the smell of her famous apple pie, but it now felt like a cramped, suffocating cage. My beautiful, sunlit life of suburban comfort, of garden parties and a two-car garage had been reduced to a fold-out sofa bed in a room that smelled of mothballs. This was my new reality, my silent sacrifice. I had sacrificed my home, my security, my entire identity, all for a man I believed was out there somewhere in the vast, lonely expanse of Texas, sacrificing everything for us. The months that followed were a grueling lesson in humility. I got a job, not in the nonprofit sector where I had once built a career, but at a 24-hour diner, taking the late shift because it paid 50 cents more an hour. I would come home at 3 in the morning, my feet aching, my clothes smelling of grease and stale coffee, and I would quietly count the crumpled dollar bills of my tips, a sad, pathetic fraction of the life we once had. I sold my jewelry, piece by painful piece, the diamond earrings my husband had given me for our 5th anniversary, the beautiful pearl necklace that had been my own mother's. Each sale was a small, sharp cut to my soul. And through it all, I was the strong one. I was the one who comforted my son when he cried at night, missing his father, missing his home. I was the one who projected an aura of relentless, unbreakable optimism. "We're a team, Miles," I would tell him, my own heart a heavy, leaden stone in my chest. "We're going to be okay." The phone calls from Trevor were my only lifeline, the one thing that made the struggle bearable. At first, they came every few days. He would sound exhausted, his voice a low, gravelly whisper from a payphone at a supposed construction site. He would tell me how hard the work was, how much he missed us. He would paint a vivid, heartbreaking picture of his own lonely, difficult life, of a man nobly sacrificing his body and his spirit to rebuild a future for his family. "I'm so close, Mary," he'd whisper, and I would clutch the phone, my eyes closed, believing every word. Just a little more time. I'm saving every penny, I promise. But the money he promised to send never arrived. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the calls became less frequent. A week would go by. Then two. His excuses were always plausible. He was working in a remote area with no reception. He had lost his phone. He was too tired, too broken to even speak. And I, the loving, trusting fool, I believed him. I made excuses for him to our son, to my mother. I defended his honor. I protected the memory of the good man I had married. The first tiny dissonant note in his perfectly composed symphony of lies arrived in a thin, white envelope. It was a piece of misdirected mail, a credit card statement forwarded from our old, foreclosed address. It was for a card in his name, a card I had never seen before. My first thought was that it was just another bill, another ghost from our old, bankrupt life. My second thought was that I should throw it away, but a strange, quiet curiosity, a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months, made me open it. I sat at my mother's small kitchen table, and I looked at the statement. And the world, which had already been turned upside down, seemed to tilt on its axis once more. The charges were not from Texas. They were from here, from our own city. They were charges from the last 30 days, charges for extravagant $500 dinners at restaurants I had only ever read about in magazines, charges for $1,000 suits from a designer boutique, charges for a lavish weekend stay at a 5-star hotel. My mind refused to process it. It had to be a mistake, a fraud. Someone must have stolen his identity now. He was in Texas, breaking his back on a construction site, not living a life of luxury in our own hometown. It was impossible. I was still staring at the impossible, damning piece of paper that night, my mind a screaming chaos, when the local evening news came on the television in the living room. My mother was watching. I was only half listening, the reporter's cheerful voice a meaningless drone in the background. And the social event of the season is in full swing, the reporter chirped, at the magnificent Harrington estate, where the city's newest and most mysterious power couple are hosting a spectacular gala for the Children's Hospital Trust. I looked up at the screen, my eyes drawn by the familiar name of the street, and then I froze. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The camera was panning across a grand, glittering party, across a crowd of the city's wealthiest and most powerful people, and the magnificent, beautifully lit home they were broadcasting from, the home they were calling the Harrington Estate, the home of the city's newest power couple, was my house. The reporter's cheerful, meaningless chatter about canapés and couture faded into a dull, distant roar in my ears. The world seemed to narrow, to flatten, until the only thing that existed was the glowing 24-inch screen of my mother's old television. My brain, which had been so clouded with grief and exhaustion for months, was now working with a frantic, terrifying clarity, trying to process an image that was simply impossible. It was my house. It wasn't a house like mine. It was my house. I could see the small, almost invisible water stain on the ceiling in the corner of the living room, the one we had been meaning to fix. I could see the row of antique books on the mantelpiece, the ones I had inherited from my grandmother. I could see the grand, sweeping branches of the old oak tree in the backyard, the tree that held the tire swing my own father had hung for me as a child, now strung with 1,000 glittering fairy lights. And into this impossible, dreamlike scene, a scene from my own life now being broadcast as a piece of society fluff, walked my husband, my Trevor. But it was not the man I remembered. The broken, defeated man who had left me on a curb, his face a mask of tragic sorrow, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man who was tanned and rested and laughing, his teeth a brilliant white against his sun-kissed skin. He was wearing a tuxedo that must have cost more than my mother's car, and on his arm, clinging to him with a look of possessive, triumphant adoration, was a beautiful, impossibly young woman in a glittering emerald green dress. "And here we are with the city's newest power couple," the reporter chirped, her microphone now in my husband's face. "The generous hosts of tonight's spectacular event, Trevor and Vanessa Harrington." Harrington. He was using his own name. My name. Our name. "Trevor, Vanessa, this is a magnificent home. You have truly created a paradise here." I watched, my body a frozen statue of disbelief, as my husband, my grieving, struggling husband, smiled his familiar, charming, and utterly false smile into the camera. "Thank you," he said, his voice a smooth, confident purr I hadn't heard in months. "We were very fortunate to acquire this property recently, after the previous owners fell on some hard times. A very tragic story, really. But we are so happy to be able to give this beautiful home a new and, I must say, far more successful chapter." And with those words, the final, brutal, and monstrous truth of his betrayal finally, completely, and totally crashed down upon me. There had been no bankruptcy. There had been no foreclosure. There had been no shame, no failure, no noble quest to Texas to find work on a construction site. It had all been a lie. A grand, elaborate, and masterfully executed piece of theater designed for one purpose: to get rid of me. He hadn't lost our home. He had just wanted me and our son out of it so he could move his new, younger, and clearly wealthier life in. My mother, Patricia, who had been sitting beside me on the sofa, let out a small, strangled gasp. That can't be," she whispered, her own face a mask of horrified disbelief. The grief I had been carrying for months, the pity I had felt for my broken husband, the shame of my own failed life, it all burned away in an instant. It was a chemical reaction, a profound and instantaneous transmutation of sorrow into something else, something clean, something cold, something as hard and as sharp as a diamond: rage. I was not a victim anymore. I was not a sad, pathetic, divorced woman living in her mother's spare room. I was a woman who had been profoundly and unforgivably wronged, and I realized in that moment of terrible, brilliant clarity, going to do something about it. I stood up. My body was trembling, not with weakness, but with a new, powerful, and utterly terrifying energy. I turned to my mother, my eyes burning with a light she had never seen before. "I need to borrow your car," I said, my voice quiet, but with a new, dangerous edge. "Meredith, honey, what are you doing?" she asked, her own eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "Where are you going?" I was already walking towards the door, grabbing her keys from the small bowl on the entryway table. I looked back at her, at the television screen where my husband was now laughing with his new wife in my old living room, and I gave my mother a small, cold, and deeply promising smile. "I'm going home," I said, my voice as cold and as sharp as ice. "It seems my husband is throwing a party, and he forgot to send me an invitation." He had built his new, perfect life on the ashes of mine, within the very walls of my own home. He was about to find out that some ghosts don't stay buried. Some ghosts get in their mother's 10-year-old sedan and they come back to crash the party. I drove through the night, my mother's old, rattling sedan, a chariot of pure, righteous fury. The drive to my old house, A journey that had once been so familiar and comforting now felt like a pilgrimage to a battlefield. The woman who had left that house 3 months ago, the sad, broken, and naive victim who had wept for her husband's failure, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone cold, someone who had seen the truth in the flickering, cruel light of a television screen, and she was coming to collect. As I turned onto my old street, the scene was even more surreal and obscene than it had been on the news. The house, my house, was ablaze with light, every window a warm, golden beacon of a life I was not a part of. A valet service with men in sharp red vests was parking a fleet of expensive foreign cars that lined the curb. I didn't pull up to the valet. I aimed my mother's beat-up 10-year-old car at the edge of the pristine front lawn and drove it right over the curb and parked it directly on the perfect manicured grass, its faded paint and sputtering engine a beautiful, ugly scar on their perfect evening. I didn't sneak in. I didn't try to find a side door. I walked up the main stone pathway, my steps sure and steady, and I pushed open the front door of my own home and walked inside. The party stopped. It did not fade, it did not quieten, it simply, in an instant, stopped. The music from the string quartet in the corner faltered into a single discordant screech. The river of cheerful high society chatter ran dry. 100 pairs of eyes, belonging to the city's wealthiest and most powerful people, all turned to stare at the strange, furious woman in a simple, worn-out dress who had just crashed their perfect, glittering party. I scanned the room, my eyes sweeping past the stunned, unfamiliar faces. And then I saw him. He was standing by the grand fireplace, a glass of champagne in his hand, holding court, a look of smug, confident satisfaction on his handsome, lying face. And on his arm, draped in a gown that shimmered with a king's ransom in sequins, was the young, beautiful woman I now knew was his mistress, his new wife, Vanessa. I began to walk towards him. The silent, gaping crowd parted from me as if I were Moses and they were the Red Sea. With every step I took across my own living room floor, the full, monstrous scope of his betrayal fueled my rage. I saw the new abstract painting hanging over the fireplace, where our family portrait used to be. I saw the new, expensive-looking furniture that had replaced the comfortable, worn-out pieces we had chosen together. He hadn't just replaced me, he had erased me. I stopped erectly in front of them. The news cameras, which had been capturing the party for the society pages, now swiveled in our direction, their red recording lights a row of hungry, unblinking eyes. Trevor's charming, confident smile froze on his face. It was followed by a flicker of confusion. And then, as he truly saw me, as he recognized the look in my eyes, his face went completely and totally pale, with a dawning, abject terror. I did not scream. I did not yell. My voice, when it came, was a quiet, clear, and carrying sound that every single person in that dead, silent room could hear perfectly. "Trevor," I began, a small, cold, and terrible smile on my face. "What a beautiful party. It is such a shame," I said, my eyes sweeping over the magnificent, familiar room, "that you didn't have the decency to invite me to my own home." His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His new wife, Vanessa, just stared, her own face a mask of beautiful, doll-like confusion. I didn't give him a chance to recover. I turned my attention to the room, to the cameras, to our captivated audience. "For those of you who don't know me," I said, my voice ringing with a new, strange, and exhilarating power, "my name is Meredith Harrington. I am this man's wife, his legal wife. We have been married for 12 years. And this," I gestured around the beautiful room, "is the home where we were raising our 7-year-old son." I then looked back at my husband, my voice now a low, conversational tone, as if I were telling a simple, sad story. This is the man who came to me 3 months ago weeping and told me that he was a failure. This is the man who told me his business was bankrupt, that we were losing everything. This is the man who cried in my arms as he told me our beautiful home was being foreclosed on. I let the words hang in the air. And this is the man who sent me and our 7-year-old son to go and live in a tiny one-bedroom apartment with my mother, while he moved his mistress into our family home and pretended that it was all his. A collective, horrified gasp went through the room. Vanessa, the new wife, looked at Trevor, her own eyes now wide with a dawning, sick horror. The story he had told her, I was certain, was very, very different. And the funniest part of this whole tragic and really quite pathetic story, I said, my gaze now finding the red, unblinking eye of the news camera, is that my husband, in his haste to erase me, seems to have forgotten one very small but very important legal detail. I smiled, a real, genuine, and deeply dangerous smile. We are still legally married, which means this house, this party, all of his companies, and all of his assets are still half mine. I then looked at the beautiful, glittering woman on his arm. And this young lady, I said, is not his new wife. She is just the other woman. I had come for a confrontation, but as I stood there watching the utter, spectacular, and very public implosion of my husband's carefully constructed new life, I realized it wasn't a confrontation at all. It was a demolition. My lawyer will be in contact with your lawyer in the morning, Trevor, I said. I then turned my back on him, on his mistress, on the wreckage of his party. I had walked into my home for the second time that night, but the first time I had been a heartbroken, ignorant victim. This time, I was leaving as a victor, and the war for my future, the war I had never even known I was in, had just been well and truly won. I turned my back on the smoldering wreckage of my husband's life and walked out of my house for the second and final time. I did not run. I did not look back. I walked with a slow, deliberate, and righteous calm, the sound of the ensuing chaos, the shouting, the gasps, the frantic questions from the reporters, a distant, unimportant symphony behind me. I got into my mother's old, beat-up car, the engine turning over with a familiar, comforting rumble, and I drove away into the cool, clean night air. A free woman. The story, of course, was a firestorm. By the next morning, it was the lead story on every local news channel, the headline on every city blog. The gala showdown. Jilted wife crashes philanthropic party, exposes billionaire husband's fake bankruptcy. The footage from the news camera, my calm, cold speech, and my husband Trevor's pale, horrified face was played on a continuous, humiliating loop. The city, which had been so quick to pity him for his tragic downfall, now turned on him with a vicious, righteous fury. He was not a tragic figure. He was a villain, a con man, and a cheat. The fallout was swift and absolute. His new wife, Vanessa, the beautiful young woman he had installed in my home, disappeared from his life within 24 hours, unwilling to be tied to a man who was now a public pariah. The powerful, important friends who had flocked to his gala now refused to take his calls. The charity board he had so proudly chaired asked for his immediate resignation. His perfect, carefully constructed world, a world built on a foundation of lies, had been demolished by a single 5-minute speech. The divorce was not a battle. It was a surrender. My lawyer, a brilliant and notoriously tough woman I had hired the morning after the party, walked into the first settlement meeting armed not just with the law, but with the undeniable, viral footage of his public humiliation. His legal team, faced with a mountain of evidence of his financial fraud and his public admission of adultery, had no cards to play. He did not fight. He couldn't. He agreed to everything. I did not want revenge. I wanted justice. And I got it. The beautiful family home, the one he had tried to steal from me, was signed over, free and clear, into my name only. I was awarded sole custody of my son Miles, and the financial settlement was staggering. My lawyer proved in court that he had not gone bankrupt, but had, in fact, hidden millions in marital assets in a series of shell corporations. The judge, clearly disgusted by Trevor's actions, awarded me a 75% share of everything. I walked out of that final court hearing, not with a sense of triumph, but with a quiet, profound sense of peace. I had not just won a divorce, I had won my life back. It's been a year now. I live in the house, my house. It is no longer the cold, performative space of my marriage. I have redecorated. It is filled with my son's messy, beautiful art projects, with the happy barking of the rescue dog we adopted, with the warm, comforting scent of my mother's apple pies. It is a home again, a real home, built on a foundation of truth and resilience. Trevor, I heard, moved to another state, a smaller, sadder man, his reputation in our city destroyed beyond repair. I do not think of him often. He is a ghost from another life, a character in a sad, cautionary tale. My vindication was not in his ruin, it was in my own rebuilding. It was in the quiet, daily, and beautiful act of creating a new and better life for myself and for my son. Last week, I hosted my own party in the grand backyard. It was not a high society gala. It was a simple, joyful barbecue for my son's 8th birthday. The yard was filled with the happy, screaming laughter of a dozen children, with the smell of hot dogs on the grill, with the love of my true and real family. My mother, my son, and my close friends. As I stood on the porch watching my son, Miles, take a joyful, triumphant swing at a brightly colored piñata, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, the sad, broken, and naive woman who had believed in a lie because she was so desperate for it to be true. I had thought my world had ended that day my husband told me we had lost everything. But he had been wrong. He had not destroyed my life. He had, in his profound and monstrous cruelty, accidentally and beautifully set me free. And I was never, ever going to be a victim again. An absolutely incredible story of a lie so big it's almost unbelievable, and a woman's powerful, public reclamation of her own life. What do you think of Meredith's decision to crash the party? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were cheering for Meredith, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more satisfying stories of karma and justice. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.